The café had always felt like a pause button on life. Cinnamon hung in the air, mixed with the bitter edge of burnt coffee beans, the kind of smell that lingered in your clothes long after you left. Outside the wide windows, autumn had taken full control of rural Vermont. Maple trees burned in shades of red and gold, as if the world itself were quietly on fire. I sat at a small wooden table with my son, Timothy, and his wife, Diane. Their voices blended into the gentle chaos of clinking cups and low conversation around us. At 64, I'd learned how to listen without really hearing, especially when conversations turned into polite pressure. "Mom, you should really think about selling the farmhouse," Diane said, stirring her latte with practiced precision. Her nails tapped against the cup, sharp and impatient. "It's too much space for one person." I smiled the way widows are expected to smile, pleasant, agreeable, non-confrontational. "I'm managing just fine." Timothy shifted uncomfortably. At 42, he had his father's broad shoulders, but none of Mark's quiet strength. "We're just worried about you," he said. "All that land, all that maintenance, it's a lot." "Your father and I handled it for 37 years, I replied softly. "I think I can manage a bit longer." That ended the conversation, as it always did when I mentioned Mark. Officially, my husband had been dead for almost a year. His car had been pulled from Eagle Lake last November, door open, no body inside. The police called it an accident. Strong currents, sometimes bodies never surfaced. I buried an empty coffin. Diane stood abruptly. "We'll grab the check." They walked toward the counter, heads bent together in quiet whispers. I watched them go, that familiar ache settling in my chest, the realization that people spoke about me now as if I weren't fully there. That's when she appeared. One moment, the chair across from me was empty. The next, a woman stood beside my table, so close I nearly knocked over my water glass. She looked to be in her early 50s, steel gray hair pulled into a severe bun. Her eyes were sharp, unsettling, like they could peel secrets straight out of a person. She wore a dark coat despite the warmth inside the cafe. "Mrs. Whitmore?" she said, not a question. "Yes?" My heart began to race. She placed a small blue box on the table between us. It was about the size of a hardcover book, plain and unmarked. "You'll need this tonight," she whispered. "I'm sorry, what?" 11:15, she said urgently. "Answer it when it rings, and trust no one." Before I could ask another word, before I could even stand, she turned and walked away. By the time I reached the aisle, she was gone, swallowed by the crowd outside. The box sat there, innocent and threatening all at once. I shoved it into my purse just as Timothy and Diane returned. "Ready to go, Mom?" Timothy asked. "Yes," I said, though my hands were trembling. "Let's go." I didn't open the box until I was home, and when I finally did, I screamed. What was inside the blue box, and why did it belong to a man declared dead nearly a year ago? Before we continue, if you enjoy slow burn mysteries with shocking twists, make sure you subscribe right now. You won't want to miss what's coming next. I locked the farmhouse door behind me, something I'd never done when Mark was alive. Back then, the land had felt safe, protected by familiarity, by routine, by him. Tonight, every shadow felt watchful. I carried my purse straight to the kitchen and placed it on the oak table. The blue box felt heavier now, as if it had gained weight during the drive home. I stared at it for a full minute, my fingers hovering just above the lid. Finally, I opened it. Inside, wrapped in white tissue paper, was a cell phone. Not just any phone. Mark's phone. The scratched black case, the faded college sticker he never bothered to peel off, even the tiny crack in the corner from when he dropped it fixing the barn roof 2 years ago. The police told me it had gone into Eagle Lake with him, lost forever. Yet here it was, sitting on my kitchen table like it had never left. My hands shook as I lifted it. The screen was dark. Dead, I assumed. I pressed the power button anyway. It turned on. Full battery, 1 bar of signal. The wallpaper appeared instantly, our anniversary photo. Mark's arm around my shoulders, both of us laughing at something our granddaughter had said. My chest tightened, breath catching in my throat. This wasn't possible. I checked the call log. Empty. Messages? Gone. Everything wiped clean except that single photo, like someone had deliberately preserved only one memory. The kitchen clock read 6:47 p.m. 11:15, the woman had said. I had over 4 hours to wait. I made tea, chamomile, the kind Mark used to mock as hot plant water. I didn't drink it. I just held the mug, watching steam rise, while the phone sat on the table like a live wire. At 7:30, I tried calling Timothy. It rang until voicemail. I didn't leave a message. How could I explain this without sounding unhinged? At 8:15, I checked every lock in the house. At 9, I pulled out the police reports from Mark's case, rereading details I already knew by heart. Wet road, sharp turn, accident. But Mark knew that road better than anyone. At 10:30, I started pacing. At 11, I sat down and forced myself to breathe. At 11:14, I watched the second hand crawl around the clock face. At 11:15 exactly, the phone rang. The sound sliced through the silence. Mark's ringtone. Born to Run. My fingers hovered, shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. It rang again. Unknown caller. On the 3rd ring, I answered. Hello? My voice cracked. Silence. Not dead air. Breathing. Slow. Controlled. Hello? I said again. Then a voice came through, distorted, mechanical, and heartbreakingly familiar. Christina, it said. Don't trust Timothy. Don't trust Diane. Don't trust the police. Your life is in danger. The line went dead. I sat frozen, phone pressed to my ear. My husband, dead, buried, gone, had just warned me and named my own son. If Mark didn't die in an accident, then who or what has been controlling the truth for the past year? Quick question for you before we continue. If you were in her place, who would you trust first? Family, police, or no one at all? Drop your answer in the comments. I didn't sleep. How could I when my dead husband had called me? I stayed at the kitchen table until dawn, the phone lying inches from my hand, like evidence from a crime I didn't yet understand. The words kept repeating in my mind, relentless and sharp. Don't trust Timothy. Don't trust Diane. Don't trust the police. By 6 in the morning, I made a decision. I wouldn't call anyone. If Mark, or someone using his voice, was right, then the moment I spoke to the wrong person, I could be putting myself in danger. That meant no police, no lawyers, and certainly no emotional confessions to my son. But I wasn't helpless. For nearly 40 years, Mark and I had run that farm together. I handled finances, negotiated contracts, and kept records neat enough to satisfy even the most stubborn county inspectors. If something didn't add up, I knew how to find it. I started with the phone. In daylight, it looked even more wrong. The battery still showed 100% despite being lost for almost a year. Someone had kept it charged, preserved, waiting. The call log was still empty, as if the midnight warning had never happened. That alone chilled me. I was scrolling through settings when I heard gravel crunch outside. My heart jumped. Timothy's SUV pulled into the driveway, unannounced, too early, too sudden. I shoved the phone into my cardigan pocket and forced myself to breathe normally as I opened the door. "Morning, Mom," Timothy said brightly, holding up a cardboard tray with 2 coffees. "Thought I'd surprise you." Diane wasn't with him. That made it worse. We sat in the living room and I watched him look around, not nostalgically, but carefully, like someone evaluating an asset. "We're worried about you," he said finally, "about you being alone out here." "I'm fine," I replied. "Are you?" He leaned forward. "Because we think it'd be better if you moved closer to town, somewhere easier to manage." There it was, again. "I'm not selling the farm," I said firmly. His jaw tightened. "Mom, be realistic. Property taxes are high, repairs are expensive, and developers are offering serious money." Developers. That word settled heavy in my stomach. "We could get top dollar, set you up comfortably." "We." I stood. "You should go." He hesitated, then said something that made my skin prickle. "We're just trying to do what's best for you, even if you don't see it yet." After he left, my hand shook so badly I had to sit down. Minutes later, I checked Mark's old email account and found proof that shattered everything I thought I knew. Emails about surveys, property evaluations, a developer's offer dated weeks before Mark's death. My husband had been negotiating to sell the farm without telling me, and suddenly the warning made terrifying sense. If Mark was planning something in secret, what did he discover that made him fear his own family? Let me ask you this. Do you think Timothy was protecting his mother or protecting himself? Tell me what you think in the comments. The knock came just after noon. 3 firm taps, not rushed, not hesitant, official. I slipped Mark's phone into my pocket before opening the door. The man on my porch looked harmless enough, mid-40s, polite eyes, neatly pressed jacket. He held up a badge before I could say a word. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Detective Brian Hardwick, Vermont State Police." My mouth went dry. "We've received some new information regarding your husband's accident," he said. "May I come in?" Every instinct screamed no, but refusing a detective would only draw attention, and attention was the last thing I needed. Inside, he spoke gently, calmly, the way professionals do when they want you to relax. "A witness came forward," he explained, "claims there may have been another vehicle on the road the night your husband went into the lake, possibly following him." Following. My heart began to race. Was Mark having any problems before his death? Hardwick asked. Financial issues, disputes? I thought of the emails, the developer, the secret negotiations. "No," I lied. It came easily. He studied me for a moment too long. "And you haven't experienced anything unusual lately? Strange calls, visitors?" The blue box, the midnight warning, the voice that sounded like my husband. "No," I said again. When he finally left, I locked the door and leaned against it, trembling. The warning had been right. Someone was watching. I went back to Mark's phone and examined it more carefully, sliding the case loose with my fingernail. That's when I found it, a tiny folded piece of paper hidden behind the battery. 4 words. "The truth is buried." My chest tightened. Buried where? Before I could think further, my phone buzzed, a text from Diane. "Just checking in. Timothy said you seemed upset. We're here if you need anything." I didn't reply. Instead, I searched the house, the attic, the basement, the barn, every place Mark ever worked. Nothing. As dusk fell, exhaustion pressed in. Then Mark's phone rang again. I answered without hesitation. "Did you find the note?" the distorted voice asked. "Yes," I whispered. "What does it mean?" "The truth is buried where you wouldn't think to look. Think back, 1 year before the accident. What changed?" Suddenly, I remembered Mark's business trip to New York. Not business, a lawyer. The line cut dead before I could ask more. I didn't waste time. I called the law office. To my shock, the attorney agreed to meet me the next day, alone. As I packed a small bag upstairs, headlights swept across the driveway. Diane's car. Alone. And when she stepped inside, her smile felt like a threat. What did Diane know about Mark's secrets, and how far was she willing to keep them buried? If you're hooked on this story and want to see how deep this mystery goes, make sure you subscribe now. The next twists change everything. Diane didn't wait for an invitation. She stepped into the house like she owned it, heels clicking against the hardwood as her eyes swept the room. Not looking for comfort, looking for value, space, leverage. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said smoothly, though we both knew she was. "You are," I replied. She smiled anyway. "Timothy told me you were upset this morning," she said, settling onto the couch with deliberate grace. "I wanted to clear the air." "The air is clear," I said. "The farm isn't for sale." Her smile thinned. "Even if keeping it costs you everything else?" The words landed heavy. She pulled out her phone and scrolled. "I took the liberty of reviewing your finances, as family, of course. You had no right." "I had every right," she said calmly. "Timothy is your heir. We needed to understand the situation." She looked up. "At your current rate of spending, you'll exhaust your savings in under 2 years." I felt the room tilt. "And your husband," she continued, "made some questionable financial decisions before his death. Large cash withdrawals, untraceable payments." My pulse thundered in my ears. "Those kinds of irregularities attract attention," she added gently. "The IRS doesn't like unanswered questions." It was a threat. "Get out," I said. She stood unfazed. "We're trying to protect you. This is a large, isolated property. Accidents happen, especially to older people living alone." My blood went cold. At the door, she paused. "We'll give you a week to reconsider the sale. After that, we may need to explore guardianship options." When she left, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. They weren't just pressuring me, they were planning to erase me. I pulled out Mark's phone, understanding at last. The withdrawals weren't secrets, they were payments. For protection, for truth, for something buried. As I zipped my bag, footsteps sounded on the porch. Slow, heavy. I looked out the window. A figure stood under the porch light, tall, familiar, standing exactly the way Mark used to. The figure raised one hand in a small wave, then pointed toward the barn. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "The barn, midnight, come alone." The clock read 11:47 p.m. Was it a trap or the only chance to uncover the truth Mark died protecting? The night air cut through me the moment I stepped outside. I hadn't even grabbed a coat, just a flashlight and my phone, set to record audio. If this was a trap, I wanted proof. If it wasn't, I needed answers more than safety. The barn sat 100 yards away, its dark outline barely visible against the starless sky. I'd walked that path thousands of times in my life. Tonight, every step felt wrong, like the land itself was holding its breath.
The barn door was slightly open. It never was. A soft glow flickered inside. "Hello?" I called. No answer. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The familiar smells hit me. Hay, oil, old wood, but something else hung in the air too. Tension, expectation. A lantern sat on Mark's old workbench, casting long shadows across the walls, and standing beside it was a man. From behind, he looked exactly like Mark. Same height, same posture, hands clasped behind his back. "Mark," I whispered. The man turned. It wasn't him, but it was close enough to steal my breath. Same build, same jawline, but his face was harder, worn. A thin scar ran along his cheek. "Who are you?" I demanded. "My name is David Hall, and I'm here because your husband asked me to be." "You're the voice on the phone." He nodded. "I altered it to protect myself." "Protect yourself from what?" He reached into his jacket and pulled out a badge. FBI. My legs nearly gave out. "Your husband came to us 2 years ago," Hall said. "He discovered something on this property, something dangerous." Before I could speak, headlights swept across the yard outside. Another car, then another. Hall cursed under his breath. "They're here." "Who?" I whispered. "Your son, his wife, and a corrupt cop." Timothy's voice echoed across the yard. "Mom, we know you're out here." Hall grabbed my arm. "The evidence Mark hid, it's real, and if they find it before we do, you won't survive the night." "What evidence?" "The truth," he said, "buried on this land." He shoved the flashlight into my hand. "Go, east side of the house, rose garden, dig at the base of the memorial bush." Gunfire cracked the air. I ran. Behind me, shouting, chaos. I tore through the garden gate, dropping to my knees in the dirt. My hands clawed the frozen soil until my fingers bled. Then, plastic, a waterproof box. I ripped it free just as Timothy burst into view. "Mom, stop!" I ran into the woods. Flashlights chased me. Then headlights appeared, engine running, door open. The woman from the café leaned out. "Get in!" I didn't hesitate. As we sped away, she looked at the box in my lap. "Is that it?" "I think so." Her jaw tightened. "Then your son will do anything to get it back." What was inside the buried box, and would it be enough to stop a man willing to kill his own father?
The motel was the kind of place people paid cash to avoid being remembered. A flickering neon sign, peeling paint, curtains that never quite closed all the way. Jennifer Ward, because that was the gray-haired woman's name, parked us near the back and killed the engine. "Once we open it," she said, nodding at the box on my lap, "there's no turning back." My hands trembled as I twisted the seal. Inside were 3 items, a USB drive, a leather-bound journal, and an envelope with my name written in Mark's handwriting. Jennifer turned away, giving me space. I opened the letter. "My dearest Christina, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm sorry." My vision blurred. Mark wrote about discovering Timothy's secret, about the cave beneath our land being used to store illegal shipments, about confronting our son, about giving him time to escape it. He tried to kill me instead. My chest felt hollow. The journal detailed everything: dates, faces, payments, Diane's role, the corruption, the threat. Jennifer plugged in the USB. "It's enough," she whispered. "Enough to end them." Her phone rang. Agent Hall. "They're moving tonight," he said. "They're going after Sarah in Boston." My heart stopped. "No," I said. "This ends now." Would you risk everything to stop your own child, or let the truth stay buried forever? For a moment, none of us spoke. The weight of Mark's words pressed down on my chest like a physical thing. He had known his own son was capable of killing him, known Diane was pulling the strings,
and still he trusted me to finish what he started. Jennifer broke the silence first. "If they're targeting your sister, they won't wait 24 hours, she said. They'll force the issue. They won't touch her, I said, surprising even myself with the steadiness of my voice. Jennifer looked at me sharply. Christina. They won't, I repeated, because we're ending this tonight. I opened Mark's journal again, flipping to a page I'd barely noticed before, a rough map of our land, the barn, the north field, the woods, and one handwritten note in the margin, emergency exit, Old Peterson Farm, unknown to them. Jennifer exhaled slowly. Mark was thorough. He always was. I explained the tunnel system, the blind spot beneath the barn, the way smugglers came and went without ever being seen from the house. I told her where Timothy would move first, where Diane would think she had control. Jennifer made a call. Boston field office, agents she trusted, not local, not compromised. We'll need them staged, quietly. By the time we returned to the farm, darkness had settled in fully. My house glowed faintly from the kitchen window, like a trap waiting to snap shut. Timothy and Diane thought I was coming to surrender. They had no idea I was bringing an ending. Inside, the kitchen was full. Timothy sat at the table, face buried in his hands. Diane stood near the window, perfectly composed. Detective Hardwick leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Two men I didn't recognize stood near the door. "Mom," Timothy said, looking up, "thank God." I didn't sit. "You killed your father," I said calmly. Silence. Hardwick scoffed. "This is nonsense." "Is it?" I asked. "Or is that why you falsified the report?" Diane's eyes narrowed. "Where is it, Christina?" "Already delivered," I said. "Every file, every recording." One of the men stepped forward. Then the lights went out. "FBI!" Jennifer's voice rang out. "Nobody move!" Chaos exploded. Shouting, gunshots, someone screamed. I dropped to the floor and crawled toward the back door exactly as planned. Outside, agents flooded the property from every direction. The farm was no longer theirs. Who would be arrested and who would beg for mercy when the truth finally came out?
The chaos ended faster than I expected. Flashlights cut through the darkness, red and blue lights painting the farmhouse in violent color. Federal agents swarmed the property like they'd been waiting for this moment, which they had. Detective Hardwick was the first to go down. I watched through the kitchen doorway as his hands were forced behind his back, his badge stripped from his belt. The calm authority he'd worn so easily collapsed into something small and bitter. Diane was next. She didn't scream, she didn't cry, she argued. "This is a misunderstanding," she insisted as agents cuffed her. "You're making a legal error. I want my attorney." Even then, she tried to control the room. Timothy sat frozen at the table. When they finally approached him, he raised his hands without resistance. His eyes found mine, wide and terrified. "Mom," he whispered, "I never meant for this to happen." I stepped closer, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "You let it happen," I said, "and that matters." He broke then, collapsed into sobs, confessing everything in fragments, how Diane had pushed, how the money came fast, how stopping felt impossible once it started. "She said Dad would ruin us," he cried. "She said it was him or us." I felt something inside me fracture. Outside, engines roared as more agents arrived. Clove's men were loaded into vehicles. Hardwick avoided my eyes. Diane still looked furious, less afraid of prison than of losing. Jennifer found me on the porch, wrapping a coat around my shoulders. "It's over," she said softly. "No," I replied. "It's just finished." Timothy was led to a federal car. He looked back once, searching for forgiveness I couldn't give. I didn't wave.
When the last vehicle pulled away, the farm fell silent again, empty, changed. I sat on the porch steps as dawn crept over the fields, feeling older and lighter all at once. Mark had been right. Blood wasn't loyalty. Truth was. With the arrests made, what would justice really cost, and would healing ever follow betrayal?
Morning came slowly, like the world itself was afraid to move. The farm looked the same, fields stretching into pale fog, the barn standing quietly against the horizon, but nothing felt familiar anymore. The land had absorbed too much truth in one night. Jennifer sat beside me on the porch, both of us holding untouched cups of coffee. "Hall's going to be okay," she said. "Broken arm, a few bruises. He wanted you to know Mark would be proud." Mark. Hearing his name no longer broke me the way it had before. It steadied me. Sarah arrived just after sunrise. She ran to me without saying a word, wrapping her arms around me so tightly I could barely breathe. And for the first time since Mark's death, I let myself cry. Over the next few days, everything moved quickly and painfully slow at the same time. Statements, lawyers, federal investigators cataloging every inch of my land. The cave beneath the north field was excavated, documented, and sealed forever. They told me Mark's evidence led to dozens of arrests across 3 states. His death was officially reopened, officially declared murder. Timothy's lawyer contacted me a week later. There would be a plea deal, cooperation in exchange for a reduced sentence. "Do you want to visit him?" Sarah asked gently. "Not yet," I said. "Maybe not ever." Justice, I learned, didn't feel like relief. It felt like grief with clarity. One afternoon, Jennifer handed me an envelope. "Mark left this with his attorney," she said. "Instructions were to deliver it once everything was over." Inside was proof of a trust Mark had quietly created, enough money to maintain the farm, enough to protect me. Even in death, he'd shielded me. That night, I stood alone in the north field, where the cave entrance had once been, and watched the sunset bleed into the horizon. The land was still mine, and so was my life. But forgiveness has its own price, and some wounds refuse to close quietly. 3 months passed. Winter softened into early spring, and the farm began to breathe again. Snow melted into mud, then into green shoots pushing stubbornly through the soil. Life, it seemed, was determined to continue, whether I was ready or not. The cave was gone now, sealed permanently at my request. I planted wildflowers over the site, bright colors meant to bury the ugliness beneath something living. Every time I walked past them, I felt like I was reclaiming a piece of myself. Sarah stayed. She said it was temporary, but we both knew the truth. The house felt warmer with her laughter echoing through the halls, less haunted. One morning, an official envelope arrived from the district attorney's office. Timothy's plea agreement. 12 years, possibility of parole after 8. I stared at the words for a long time. Sarah watched me carefully. "You don't owe him anything," she said. "Not forgiveness, not visits, not explanations." "I know," I replied, and I did. That night, I dreamed of Mark, not as a ghost, not as a warning, but as he'd been in life. Mud on his boots, smile soft, proud. When I woke, I realized something important. Forgiveness isn't something you give to make others feel better. It's something you offer only when it no longer wounds you to do so. And I wasn't there yet. Maybe someday. Outside, the barn stood quiet in the morning light, a place of memories, good and terrible, but still standing. So was I. If forgiveness isn't the end, then what comes next after survival? Spring arrived fully, the way it always did, without asking permission. The farm changed color almost overnight. Fields that had been dull and brown turned green, the air filling with the sound of birds that hadn't dared come near during the long winter. I took it as a sign, not a forgiveness, of continuation. I met with lawyers in town, not to sell the land, but to protect it. The farm was placed into a preservation trust, protected from developers, shielded from anyone who would ever try to erase its history again. Part working land, part conservation, part quiet refuge. Mark would have liked that. Sarah helped me reorganize the house, room by room, not erasing Mark, never that, but making space for something new. A reading nook where his office used to be, a guest room painted a soft yellow instead of grief gray. One afternoon, I found myself laughing. The sound startled me. I stood in the kitchen, sunlight spilling across the floor, realizing that survival hadn't been the end of my story. It had been the beginning of a different one. Jennifer sent a postcard from Boston. "You were stronger than you ever believed," it read. I smiled and placed it on the fridge. That night, I walked the property alone, not afraid, not watched, just present. The land no longer felt like a battleground. It felt like home again. But one final message was still waiting, and it would change how she remembered everything. The call came on a quiet evening. No warning, no build-up, just the soft vibration of a phone that hadn't rung in months. Mark's phone. I stared at it on the kitchen counter, my breath slowing instead of catching. Fear no longer lived in this house, not the kind that controlled me at least. Whatever this was, I was ready. I answered. "Christina," the voice said. Not distorted, not mechanical, just him. I closed my eyes. "I know," he continued gently. "You did everything right." Tears slid down my cheeks, but I didn't sob. I smiled. "I miss you," I whispered. "I never left," he replied. "I just needed you to see the truth on your own." The line stayed open a moment longer than expected, long enough to feel real, long enough to feel like goodbye. Then it went silent. The phone powered off. Forever. I walked outside as the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows across the land Mark and I had built our lives on. The barn stood strong. The fields were alive. The house behind me was warm. For the first time in a year, I felt complete. Not because everything was fixed, but because nothing owned me anymore. Not fear, not grief, not betrayal. Just peace. Some truths don't destroy you, they set you free. If this story moved you, stay connected. More stories are waiting.